It would be safe to say that Metroid is one of my favorite game franchises. And if you knew me, it'd be easy to see why. The series takes heavy inspiration from the likes of the Alien movie franchise and blends that with the likes of Castlevania and Super Mario Bros. But it doesn't stop there. It takes those elements and melds them in with a semi-open world design, complete with many paths to find and power-ups to acquire. It really is a killer formula. I still remember my first time playing Metroid on the NES, but it wasn't the most pleasant of experiences. I liked it well enough, and the overall design was interesting, but the game was crazy hard. And the world, while impressive in size, was a terrible and brutal maze with a lot of dead ends and roadblocks along the way. To say Nintendo was wise to remake this game would be a massive understatement. This original game was very much a product of a less experienced Nintendo with a lot of glaring flaws, in spite of the overall good premise. I'm choosing not to review this original game because, frankly, it kind of sucks. And to hear me of all people say this says a lot, as Super Metroid, aka Metroid 3, is my all-time favorite video game, period. Instead, we are going to dive into the remake of the first game, Metroid Zero Mission. Nintendo chose to remake the first Metroid game at what might be the best possible time in the company's history. Nintendo had previously set the standard for the subgenre we now refer to as Metroidvania with the release of Super Metroid in 1994. It was a Super NES game that many people consider to be a mostly perfect game. Well, perfectly designed, anyway. But when the N64 came in to replace the Super Nintendo as Nintendo's primary home console, the company couldn't figure out what to do with Metroid in 3D. So they just didn't make one. That's right, not a single Metroid game came out during the Nintendo 64 generation. Fans definitely wanted to see it happen though. The likes of Star Fox 64 and Jet Force Gemini gave us a tiny glimpse into the sci-fi world that could have been, but alas, it was not meant to be. Fast forward to 2002 and Nintendo was finally ready to grace us with not one, but two Metroid games, both set to release that year. Metroid Prime was the fancy 3D game that finally brought Metroid into the third dimension, and Metroid Fusion was a 2D entry for the newly minted GameBoy Advance handheld. 2 years later, however, Nintendo came back with yet another 2D Metroid on the GBA. Where Metroid Fusion was the proper fourth entry in the series and followed the events of Super Metroid, Metroid Zero Mission went back to the beginning and told the story of Samus Aran's first encounter with space pirates on planet Zebes. And yes, I'm pronouncing it Zebes and not Zebes. The story of Zero Mission sticks pretty closely to that of the original game, but isn't afraid to deviate. It has a number of new boss encounters, areas, and enemies, but all of them adhere to what you would expect from the franchise. You'll still find Criteria, Brinstar, Norfair, and Turian here, but all of them are tweaked considerably and only sort of resemble those same areas from Super Metroid or the original. New here are the Kraid and Ridley areas, which are really just expansions of Brinstar and Norfair, much in the same way that Lower Brinstar and Lower Norfair served as boss territories in Super Metroid. Unlike Super Metroid, however, you won't find Meridia or Wrecked Ship, but that kind of makes sense given that this game takes place before Super Metroid does. You'll also find all the same boss characters, those being Kraid, Ridley, and Mother Brain. But there are several others as well. The Acid Worm is a somewhat typical boss fight with a spiked worm that tunnels through the floors and ceilings. It's not a bad fight by any means. It helps you acclimate with the controls and mechanics early on and breaks up the pace of the game a bit. But beyond that, while welcome, it's not especially memorable. A couple of other new additions harken back to those found in past games. The ensnared larva behaves much like Spore Spawn from Super Metroid, spewing projectiles while you do your best to land some careful shots to its tendons. Likewise, the wasp creature is very similar to that of Super Metroid's Meridia boss, Dragoon. It swoops down to attack you and you need to shoot its stinger. It's a bit tougher than Dragoon, but not by much. And every once in a while, you get something like this caterpillar. I'll be honest, this thing drove me nuts when I first came across it, as it was completely unresponsive to my attacks and was blocking the way forward. After some exploring, I ran into the caterpillar again, but this time from another direction. It was an interesting fight. You see, shooting it with my newly acquired power-up did cause it to reel back, but it didn't really cause any damage. You have to attack its stomach, and as you can see, that's not really an option. The trick, it turns out, is to simply push it back with regular shots and then drop bombs while in morph ball form as it begins to bum rush you. By the time the bombs explode, the caterpillar happens to be sitting right on top of them. And that's that. There are a few moments like this throughout the game, moments that require you to think a little outside the box, and I can definitely appreciate that. Now, the old standbys, Kraid and Ridley, are a different story. Kraid, in theory, isn't actually all that hard. Instead, the difficulty comes from the super narrow window you have to contend with. In typical Kraid fashion, you need to shoot him in the face in order to get him to open his mouth, at which point you land a shot directly into his chomper. But for whatever reason, I had a heck of a time hitting the right spot on his face to get the reaction I was hoping for. Ridley is a different story altogether. The game was showing all the typical signs that I was in for a tough time with this guy. Ammo drops were all over the place and there were a number of save points leading up to his lair. So as I approached, I was gearing up for a tough time. And then nothing. I ran straight through his lair and proceeded to the next room. Confused, I headed back and here we go. The bastard finally decided to show up. So I started to unload. Then, it was over. I have to say, I was supremely underwhelmed with Ridley in this game. Sure, he looks cool and behaves much like he does in Super Metroid. Almost too similar, but that's it. Unload some missiles, and he's toast. And now for the big bad, Mother Brain. This fight was expected to be tough. Well, the lead up to her anyways, and it was. This is where the Metroids themselves finally make an appearance, and the way they handled them here is cool. Using the crazy tech of the 32-bit Game Boy, the Metroids zoom in from the background before attacking. They perform exactly as they always have, but will occasionally show up in larger numbers and try to swarm you. It's not too hard, but still very cool to see. Entering Mother Brain's chamber reveals the expected onslaught of nonsense projectiles from every which way. Seriously, the amount of tiny little bullet things and atomic donuts is as crazy as ever. The developers did do us one solid, however. They don't introduce the lava pit until just before Mother Brain. But that's not the break it sounds like. As you can see, this is absolutely ridiculous. There's just no way to avoid any of it. The fight itself is pretty straightforward. Shoot the glass, break the glass, shoot her in the eyeball. But let's just say it's easier said than done. After this, the game is over. Or is it? In a strange twist, Nintendo saw fit to add a whole new area to the end of the game. Instead of Samus simply flying away, she is attacked as soon as she leaves orbit and crash lands on a Chozo planet inhabited by space pirates. In case you don't know, the Chozo are a bird-like alien race who raised Samus Aran and taught her to be the bounty hunter we know and love. They designed her suit and its many upgrades, and their technological superiority has not gone unnoticed by the space pirates. After crash landing, our suit is damaged and all of the fancy upgrades we've picked up thus far are deactivated. We are now in our Zero suit with only an emergency energy pistol for defense. This is going to require a drastic change in approach. From this point forward, we cannot take on the space pirates head on. Technically, we've not really dealt with them prior to this, only their leaders, but still, we are defenseless now, and this means we need to sneak around. And that's not going to be easy. I'm a bit mixed on this segment. The feeling of being stripped of your powers is thrilling in a lot of ways, but it also feels so anti-Metroid, ironically enough. Given that this tends to happen at the start of most Metroid games, it really threw me off when it happened here at the end. As I pressed on, I definitely began to long for some kind of empowerment, anything that would let me fight back, but nothing. However, I did start to see doors that could only be opened with certain weapons, so I knew something was coming my way. I also noticed a few other changes during this segment. Save rooms were plentiful, but they also replenished my health and ammo now, which is good since I can't kill bad guys to collect health and ammo from them. Then it happened. I recovered my suit, and then some. And oh, what a feeling. Finally, I was able to lay waste to these pirate bastards, and it felt good. The enemies still don't drop health or ammo, but it's no big deal. And somewhat hilariously, being spotted still sends the pirates into a frenzy, except now I'm essentially inviting them to the slaughter. Good times all around. Before too long, I'm faced with one final boss, Mecha Ridley. This robotic doofus is mostly for show. Simply shoot its chest a few times and it's over. Then, naturally, a self-destruct timer is set and it's time to go. The escape route isn't anything to worry about, it's fairly straightforward and you're given a ton of time. And that's it. The mission is finally complete. I must say, this is a really great way to experience the first Metroid. The controls are ultra tight and snappy. Platforming can still be a bit tricky at times, especially during the Mother Brain fight, but it's still leagues better than past entries, sans Fusion. The GBA's limited control options do get in the way somewhat though. Holding the L trigger to do directional aiming is a bit difficult in tense situations, and holding R to shoot missiles or set power bombs requires a bit of dexterity that you may or may not have. The last thing I want to say about the gameplay is this. It can feel a bit handholdy. Every once in a while you'll come across a Chozo statue not unlike those that give you upgrades to your suit, but these ones have one purpose and one purpose only, to tell you where to go next. Now, it's not an in-game GPS or anything. It only gives you a vague idea of which direction you need to head. It's up to you to figure out the rest. Now, being a Metroid purist, this drove me a little nuts. But it's nowhere nearly as intrusive as Metroid Fusion, and if I'm being honest, this was a great idea as the NES original was beyond vague, and if this remake didn't address this one issue, it would essentially be a failure. Visually, the game looks like it's running on a souped up Super Nintendo, and I love it. For this run, I did use a ROM hack to improve the color somewhat. You see, the GBA didn't launch with a backlit screen, and as a result, games had to be designed in such a way that they'd remain visible regardless of lighting conditions. This results in a lot of games looking a bit blown out, so this hack addresses that and reins in the color just a bit. Audio is another unique thing about the GBA. It was capable of some pretty great things, but it required a bit more from the developers. This isn't the Super Nintendo sound chip after all. But like the graphics, the sound can be less than ideal when played on anything other than a GBA. The solution I settled on was a simple low-pass filter. I'm not sure if this is the best option, but it does sound pretty good to my ears. I first completed Metroid Zero Mission on my Glacier White GBA back in 2004. It was my first ever handheld, and I could not have been happier as a Metroid fan. But for whatever reason, I never went back to this one, or Metroid Fusion. Then I decided to do this video instead of Super Metroid, and I'm not disappointed. It is mostly as good as I remember, a bit short but well paced, a ton of variety, beautiful graphics and decent sound, and tons of new content. I'm not entirely sure I'm on board with the end segment, but the payoff is strong enough that I can dismiss this slight blemish. If you're a fan of Metroidvanias, I'm going to assume you've played this, but if not, what are you even doing? Get on it. It's not one you'll want to miss. Well, that was fun. As always, I want to thank you for watching until the end of this video. I had a blast making this one and revisiting a game that I haven't played for several decades at this point. Instead of the usual, I'm going to wrap this up with a question. What is your favorite Metroid or Metroidvania game? And why is that game your favorite? Let me know in the comments. I cannot wait to see your guys' responses. Thanks for watching.